Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be exploring power.
Ooh, power.
Yeah, power. It's a big one, right?
Huge topic.
And you've given us just a ton of different sources to go through today.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we've got philosophers, we've got Byung-Chul Han,
Love him.
Nietzsche, Foucault,
Classics.
and then you've also got these pieces on like digital society and ritual, even beauty. It's a lot to cover.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, though, to kind of like see how all these things connect.
Right. Like at first glance, they seem kind of all over the place, but I have a feeling we'll start to see how they all kind of relate to each other.
Yeah, the web of ideas.
Totally. So, I guess our kind of mission today is to really try to understand how power works.
Yeah, how it functions.
Not just like the simple who's in charge kind of power, but like the more subtle ways that it operates in our lives.
Right, the kind of power we don't even realize is acting on us.
Exactly. And especially how technology is kind of changing the game.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge part of it these days.
So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so first up, Byung-Chul Han. This guy, he's got some really interesting ideas about how power and freedom are actually kind of connected.
Yeah, he actually argues that power doesn't exist without freedom.
Wait, what? That doesn't make sense. How can something that controls us be dependent on freedom?
Well, he makes this distinction between power and violence. Violence, right, kind of just eliminates choice.
Right, it forces you to submit.
Exactly. But power, it actually thrives on the choices that we make.
So the more choices we have, the more power can be exercised.
Yeah, think about it like this. A tyrant, someone who rules through violence, their power is actually pretty limited.
Because everyone's just afraid of them.
Right, but in a more complex system, like a big company, for example, power grows as more and more decisions are made.
Oh, because each employee is making choices, and those choices are all feeding into this larger system of power.
Exactly. The more choices, the more power.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So, like, even in a democracy where we supposedly have all this freedom, power can still operate in these really subtle ways.
It's all about influencing the choices that we make.
Okay, so Hans got me thinking about power in a whole new light. Now, what about Nietzsche? He had some pretty intense ideas about power and meaning, especially when it comes to language.
Yeah, he was a bit of a firebrand.
For sure. So what was his deal with language?
Well, he saw language as a tool for exerting power, for shaping the way people understand the world.
It's not just about communicating information.
He went way deeper than that. He actually believed that early forms of communication were almost like violent acts.
Violent? Really?
He said signs were initially like painful imprints, and understanding those signs was a form of submission.
So like the first words were basically weapons.
Kind of. He believed that even naming things was about exerting control over them, defining their meaning in the world.
So like whoever gets to name things has a lot of power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it in terms of like modern media, right?
Yeah.
The language that's used to sell us products, to shape our opinions.
Yeah, the slogans, the jingles, the carefully crafted messages, all of that.
Right. It's all designed to influence us, to persuade us, to get us to see the world in a particular way.
So it's like we're constantly bombarded with these painful imprints, these messages that are shaping our desires and beliefs.
And the more we consume this information, the more we become accustomed to these ways of thinking.
It's like we're being programmed without even realizing it.
It's a subtle form of power, but it can be incredibly effective.
Okay, this is getting deep. We've gone from the boardroom to the billboard. And now I'm starting to see power dynamics everywhere.
It's all connected.
It is. And speaking of power dynamics, Foucault had some really fascinating insights into how the actual technologies of power have evolved over time, right?
Right. He talked about this contrast between what he called the spectacle of violence.
Okay, so like public executions, that kind of thing.
Yeah, basically using violence to instill fear and obedience.
Yeah. Brutal, but effective, I guess.
For a time, yeah. But Foucault argued that this was eventually replaced by something he called the civil code.
And that's like...
It's basically the system of laws, institutions, all the rules and regulations that govern our lives.
Ah, so instead of the executioner's sword, it's more like the lawyer's pen.
Exactly. It's a more subtle and pervasive form of power that operates through these systems we've created.
And the crazy part is we often participate in our own control by following these rules and norms.
We internalize them, so they become part of who we are, how we see the world.
It's like we're both the prisoners and the guards in this system.
That's a powerful way to put it.
And it's kind of scary, right? Like, Do we even have any real freedom if we're so deeply embedded in these systems of control?
That's the question we need to keep asking ourselves.
Okay, so we've got Han's ideas about power and freedom, Nietzsche's thoughts on language as a tool of power, and Foucault's insights into how the technologies of power have evolved. And now we're stepping into the digital age.
Where things get even more complex and, frankly, a bit more unsettling.
Right, because now we've got the digital panopticon, this idea that we're constantly being watched and monitored by technology.
And not only that, but we're willingly participating in our own surveillance.
By sharing all our information online.
Exactly. Our likes, our dislikes, our location, our browsing history, it's all being collected and analyzed.
And then used to target us with ads, to manipulate our opinions, to shape our behavior.
Han calls this neoliberal power, this way of controlling people by shaping their desires and choices, often under the guise of freedom and self-expression.
It's like we think we're making free choices, but really, those choices are being subtly influenced by the system.
It's a very effective form of control because it doesn't feel like control.
Right, it feels like freedom. But is it really? That's the question we need to ask ourselves.
It's a question we need to keep asking as technology becomes more and more integrated into our lives.
And as our data becomes more and more valuable to those who seek to control us?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our data is the new currency of power.
Wow, this is a lot to process. I'm starting to feel a little paranoid.
It's understandable, but remember, awareness is the first step towards resistance.
True. So we've talked about the digital panopticon, the dangers of transparency, the power of algorithms, and all this data that's being collected about us.
There's a lot.
But Han also points to something that's been lost in this transition to the digital world: ritual.
Ah, yes. Ritual.
Yeah.
Such a powerful force that's often overlooked.
So like religious rituals, ceremonies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those are certainly examples. But ritual is broader than that. It's any kind of structured, repetitive activity that has symbolic meaning.
And what's so special about ritual?
Well, Han argues that rituals create a sense of community and meaning without the need for constant communication.
So like it's not about talking all the time, it's about doing things together, sharing experiences.
Exactly. And he makes this really interesting observation about the like button.
Oh yeah, the ubiquitous like button.
He sees it as a kind of superficial substitute for the depth and commitment that's fostered by rituals.
So instead of engaging in meaningful activities together, we're just clicking buttons, giving each other these little digital pats on the back.
It's a quick hit of connection, but it's fleeting. It's shallow.
And it doesn't really build any lasting bonds.
Right. And that's what rituals do. They connect us to something larger than ourselves. They give us a sense of belonging, of purpose.
Okay, so we're losing rituals in the digital age.
And that loss, according to Han, is making us more susceptible to the individualized and atomized forms of control that are emerging.
Because we're also isolated and disconnected from each other.
Exactly. We're easier to manipulate when we're alone.
Okay, so we need to bring back rituals. But what kind of rituals, and how do we do that in this hyper-digital world?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's about being more intentional, more mindful about how we connect with each other, how we create meaning in our lives.
It's about putting down our phones and actually engaging with the world around us.
And with each other in real, meaningful ways.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now. We've covered so much ground already, and I'm sure our listener is feeling as mentally stimulated as I am.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But it's a good start, I think.
Definitely. And I'm really excited to keep exploring these ideas further. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of power.
Stay tuned. It makes you think, doesn't it? Like all these forces that are shaping our world, often without us even realizing it.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky. And, earlier we were talking about how power is different from violence, according to Han.
Right. That distinction is really important.
But it seems like violence is also a form of power, just a more brutal and direct one.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But Han argues that they actually operate in very different ways.
So how does he break it down?
Well, violence is all about eliminating choice. It forces people to submit through, physical force or threats.
Oh, right, it's about coercion.
Exactly. But power, as we've been discussing, is more about influencing the choices people make within a given system.
Okay, so, a tyrant might use violence to stay in control, but their real power comes from the system they create, the rules and structures that shape people's behavior.
Exactly. And, as societies become more complex, the role of violence tends to decrease.
Really? Why is that?
Well, It's not necessarily because those in power become nicer, it's more that they develop more subtle and effective forms of control.
Ah, so it's like they don't need to resort to violence because they've figured out how to control people in other ways.
Right. They've created systems that encourage people to control themselves.
It's like those invisible fences for dogs. They stay within the boundaries not because they're physically trapped, but because they've learned to associate crossing the line with a shock.
That's a great analogy. And it brings us back to Han's warnings about the digital age, right? We're willingly participating in these systems of surveillance and data collection, even though they can be used to control us.
Yeah, it's like we've traded the iron bars of a physical prison for the invisible walls of a digital one.
We're free to roam within the confines of the system, but those confines are still very much in place.
And the scary part is we might not even realize we're being controlled.
Right. We might mistake the illusion of choice for genuine freedom.
Okay, so what can we do about it? Are we just doomed to be controlled by these digital systems?
I don't think it's hopeless. The first step is awareness, as we've talked about.
So the more we understand about how these systems work, the better equipped we are to resist them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Right. So we need to educate ourselves about how our data is being collected, how algorithms are shaping our online experiences, and what the potential consequences are for our freedom.
And it's not just about individual awareness, it's also about collective action.
So like organizing, protesting, demanding change.
Yeah, we need to engage in open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of these technologies, and we need to push for greater transparency and accountability from the companies and institutions that are controlling them.
It's like we need a digital bill of rights, something that protects our fundamental freedoms in the online world.
I think that's a powerful idea.
It is. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from corporate power structures to the persuasive power of language to the digital panopticon. And I have to say, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the ways in which power operates in our world.
It's all connected.
It is, and it's often operating in these really subtle, almost invisible ways.
And that's why it's so important to be aware, to be critical, to be engaged.
Totally. So before we move on, I just got to ask, where does beauty fit into all of this? We haven't talked about it much, and it seems like a bit of an outlier in this whole power dynamic discussion.
That's a great question, and it's one that Han actually addresses in his work.
Really? I'm intrigued. What's his take on beauty?
He argues that beauty, in its true form, has this really powerful ability to disrupt systems of control.
Wait, what? How does beauty disrupt power?
He believes that genuine beauty has the power to shake us out of our complacency, to make us question our assumptions, and to see the world in new ways.
So it's like beauty can be a form of resistance.
Exactly. It has this ability to awaken our senses, to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
But doesn't Han also say that beauty is under threat in our modern world?
He does. He argues that our constant exposure to images, the emphasis on superficiality, the commodification of everything, it's all eroding our capacity to experience true beauty.
It's like we're drowning in a sea of pretty pictures, but we've lost the ability to be truly moved by something beautiful.
Right. Everything feels so disposable, so fleeting.
So what's the antidote? How do we cultivate a sense of beauty in a world that seems determined to flatten and commodify everything?
I think it starts with being more mindful about what we allow into our consciousness. It's about slowing down, paying attention, seeking out experiences that truly move us.
It's about rediscovering that sense of awe and wonder that we so often lose sight of in the rush of everyday life.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of curiosity, of openness to new experiences.
And recognizing that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places if we're willing to look for it.
I love that. So we need to reclaim beauty as a form of resistance, as a way to push back against the forces that are trying to control us.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. By cultivating our capacity for beauty, we can begin to dismantle the structures of power that are shaping our lives.
And create a world that's more humane, more vibrant, more connected to the things that truly matter.
That's such an inspiring thought. But before we get too carried away with the transformative power of beauty, there's one more crucial element we need to address: our own power as individuals.
Ah, yes, the power within.
We've talked a lot about these external forces of power, but what about our own agency? Can we actually resist these systems, or are we just cogs in the machine?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer.
So what do you think?
I think the first step is recognizing the power dynamics that are operating within ourselves.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we internalize the rules, the expectations, the norms of the systems we inhabit.
Yeah.
And those internalized structures of power can be just as controlling as any external force.
So, like, the first step towards resistance is becoming aware of the ways in which we're already controlling ourselves.
Exactly. We need to examine our own beliefs, our assumptions, our habits,
Yeah.
and ask ourselves, are these truly our own, or have we just adopted them from the systems we're a part of?
That's a tough one. It's like trying to see the forest for the trees.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's necessary if we want to reclaim our autonomy.
So awareness is key, but it can't just be about individual awareness, right?
Right, there's a collective element to this as well.
So what do we do?
We need to connect with others who share our values, who are also seeking to challenge the status quo.
So building communities of resistance.
Exactly. Online and offline.
And those communities can be powerful forces for change.
They can help us break free from the isolating effects of the digital age and cultivate the courage to resist the systems that are trying to control us.
This has been a real wake-up call for me. It's challenged me to think more critically about power and to seek out ways to resist the forces that are trying to diminish our freedom.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. And I have a feeling our listener is feeling equally inspired to take action. Wow, this deep dive has really been something else.
Yeah, pretty intense.
We've gone from like corporate boardrooms to like the depths of the internet.
And even touched on beauty.
Right. It's amazing how it's all connected, though, like power is this underlying current that runs through so much of our lives.
It's like the invisible hand shaping our world.
Exactly. But, I think what's really resonated with me through all this is the idea that we're not powerless.
Right. We have more agency than we often realize.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by these systems, these structures, all this technology.
Especially in the digital age.
But ultimately, we have the power to choose, to resist, to create change.
It all starts with awareness, like we've been saying.
Right, so understanding how these systems work, how they influence us, that's the first step.
But then we got to take that awareness and turn it into action.
So how do we do that? Like, what's the next step?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to cultivate critical thinking.
Okay, so not just accepting things at face value, but really digging deeper, asking questions.
Exactly. We need to question the assumptions, the narratives that shape our world.
Like, whose interests are being served by the system? Who benefits from this way of thinking?
Right. And we need to be willing to challenge those assumptions, to think for ourselves.
It's about developing that healthy skepticism, right?
Exactly. But it's not just about being critical, it's also about being compassionate.
Ah, so understanding how these systems impact real people, real lives.
Yeah, we need to connect with those who are marginalized, who are excluded, who are suffering because of these systems.
Right, because it's easy to get lost in the abstract ideas, but ultimately, power dynamics are playing out in real-world consequences for real people.
And that understanding can fuel our passion for change.
Okay, so we've got the critical thinking, the compassion, and then,
Community. We can't do this alone.
right, finding others who share our values, who are also working to create change.
Exactly. Building networks of support, collaboration, inspiration.
It's about collective action, right? Because individual action can only take us so far.
It's about leveraging our collective power to create real, lasting change.
Hey, this is starting to feel a lot more hopeful. It's not just about resisting these negative forces, but about actively building something better.
I love that. It's about creating the world we want to see.
Exactly. And using our power, our voices, our actions to make that vision a reality.
It's a beautiful thing to be a part of.
It really is. This
Yeah.
whole deep dive has been such an incredible experience.
Yeah, a real journey.
We've gone deep, explored some dark corners, but ultimately I feel like we've come out the other side with a renewed sense of hope and possibility.
And a call to action.
Absolutely. To our listener, we say this: embrace your power. Don't be afraid to question, to challenge, to create.
Find your people, build community, and work together to make this world a better place.
The power is in your hand.
And in your hearts.
That's a beautiful note to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time, ready to explore more big ideas and challenge the status quo.
Keep questioning, keep learning, keep creating.
And keep shining your light.